Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to day 2 of Woodburn Accountants and Advisors webinar series on doing business in China successfully. Today's topic is 7 reasons a limited liability company formation is the best onshore option in the Chinese mainland. However, before we begin today's presentation, I would just like to do a little bit of admin. The use of a VPN may be required for people based in mainland China, obviously due to the beautiful and wonderful Great Firewall. I'm also currently on a VPN, so if there are technical issues during today's presentation, please don't leave the webinar. I will return as soon as possible to complete the presentation. As you should have seen, once you launched into the session, you should have been prompted to the audio section of the control panel. You have the option of logging in either with your computer audio system or via a landline or mobile phone. Obviously, the cheaper option is to use the computer audio, but if there are a lot of sound issues on your end, then the phone call will provide you with better listening option. This is what you will see when you click on the telephone section of the audio control panel. In addition, if you have any questions or comments, please don't be shy. Add them into the questions section of the control panel, which is highlighted here, as you can see. We will be having a 10-15 minute Q&A at the end of today's presentation. I will be primarily answering the questions asked on our registration form, and if we have the time, I will move on to questions asked during today's presentation. If we don't get to those questions, don't leave the webinar. I will answer you one by one immediately following today's presentation. If you need to leave, totally understandable. I will be emailing you to answer your questions. So as mentioned, don't be shy. Feel free to ask away. Now, let's test the system. As you've all seen, you are all muted. I am going to keep you all muted in order to avoid any background noise that might appear during today's presentation. Now, if you could click on the raise your hand button on the control panel, that will allow me at least to know that you are able to listen to me and hear me. That'll be a great support. And why don't you then click once again on the hand button so that you can remove it. So let's begin today's presentation. A brief introduction about us. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investment to China and Hong Kong. We establish, manage, and administer companies in China and Hong Kong to meet our clients' specific requirements, which include market entry, cross-border investment, tax optimization, and corporate restructuring. Our clients are all international companies focused on inbound China investments. The strategy of our clients can be anything from manufacturing in China, exporting from China, importing and selling into China, and offering a variety of services within China. They range from startups, small, medium-sized companies, all the way up to multinationals and publicly listed firms. The presentation today is a general view for everyone, and the points that I'm highlighting will apply to all companies that are investing in China. If you would like to have a free consultation on your specific needs, don't hesitate to contact me and I'd be happy to assist you. Now, a little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. Since 2003, I've been advising clients on their market entry needs into China as well as their local expansions. 2 points I'd just like to highlight about myself. During my time in China, I've learned a great deal of patience, which definitely everyone will learn when they're doing an investment in China. And I tend to have an eye on detail. For me, these are 2 big requirements that any foreigner that is planning on investing in China should learn in order to not only survive mentally, but also to be successful within their business organization. One thing I do pride myself on is that I have the ability to also problem solve. For anybody that is hitting a roadblock in China. With the last 15 years of experience in China, I tend to be able to find loopholes within the Chinese system where my clients are then able to achieve their objectives and goals. Now, my goal of today's webinar, similar to what I said in yesterday's webinar, it's not to instill fear in people. The primary goal is really to inspire you, inform you, and educate you on doing business in China successfully. My true belief is knowledge is power, and the minute that you have just a little bit more knowledge than somebody else, it will guide you further within your China journey. Now, the agenda for today's presentation, again, the title is 7 Reasons a LLC formation is the best onshore option in the Chinese mainland. And I've highlighted here, basically in the agenda, the 7 items that I'm going to be touching on. Now, if you didn't join yesterday's webinar, I ended the webinar with a big tip. And the big tip for yesterday was to create your business plan, create your budget, and incorporate the top 10 checklists that I highlighted yesterday. So again, today we will be looking at what my big tip of the day is, so that you have an idea by the end of this week's webinar series what really are my 5 key points that I'd love for you to take away from this webinar series and implement then into your business in China. Now, if you have ever seen me speak, either on previous webinars or at speaking events, I usually never, ever touch on statistics. And the primary reason behind that is because I don't find these statistics being provided by any Chinese government office to be reliable. So I actually just don't like to use them within my presentations because I think it gives people the wrong picture. However, I find these statistics today extraordinary. And they are outdated just because I can't find current data associated with it. But I wanted to use these statistics, even if there is a 10-15% mark up or mark down, to highlight what's happening in the Chinese market. And these are all numbers that have been provided by the Administration of Industry and Commerce in China. That's the government body that helps you to incorporate entities. So the number of companies in China, foreign and domestic, is 77,469,000. Remember, this was reported in January 2016. We are now in April 2018. So obviously the number has increased tremendously. The estimate is that there's a rise of 11.8% of companies per year. On average, 12,000 companies are registered per day, which is on average 4 million companies per year. And the AIC defines a small business as a company that has a registered capital of less than 20 million renminbi. And that accounts for approximately 96% of all companies that are registered in China. I think these numbers are phenomenal. I haven't actually compared them to numbers from other jurisdictions in Europe or in Australia or even in the US, Canada. But it would definitely be an interesting comparison to make. So you are now ready to launch your company in China. You have done your research, I hope, and you know there's a market potential for your business. You have found the right location to call home, and now it's time to decide on what type of structure will suit your needs to achieve your short and long-term objectives. Now, as I mentioned in yesterday's webinar, I think one of the key points that you need to do at this point is to create a bullet point list of the activities you want to perform and the products and services you want to deal with within your trade transactions. Now, ultimately, you have a choice. You can start cautiously. You can do that by testing the market, building your network, being able to hire a small quantity of employees, or you can go right in. Establish a limited liability company with a capital investment in China. And today I'm going to highlight why the latter would be a better option for you. But before I can actually tell you why that would be a better option, for those of you that are obviously new to the market, I need to highlight to you what structures actually exist. Because without knowing what structures exist and what each structure means, you can't really make a decision. So the first structure I want to highlight today is a representative office. Now, a representative office is a non-legal entity. It is dependent upon the shareholder from a legal and financial perspective. And what a lot of people say is that a representative office is a liaison office for the shareholder. So everyone has a different definition of liaison. I am now going to tell you the definition that I took from the Oxford Dictionary, which is a liaison office can only communicate, cooperate, and facilitate working relationships between people, companies, and organizations. Why did I do this? And like I said earlier, I'm really into detail. The reason I did this is because when the government issues a regulation, it's always gray. And you can create as many definitions and interpretations as you like. So what I would like you all to do is when there is a legislation that's implemented or a regulation that's being implemented, is to go into the Oxford Dictionary to understand the terms. And that's probably the easiest way to understand then more clearly from your perspective what these regulations actually mean. Now, my interpretation of this definition is that a representative office, it can't negotiate deals. It can't provide physical, on-the-ground, or overseas services, nor can it trade in any goods domestically or internationally. And ultimately, this includes samples, which is a key thing historically because a lot of sourcing companies were establishing representative offices in China. Now on this slide, I've highlighted what the official business scope is in English. And as you can see, it's market research, product display, publicity of activities, liaison activities relating to the sale of products or provision of services. Now, be very careful about what you're doing with a representative office and make sure that the activities you are doing fall within this business scope. There are also tremendous criteria to establish a representative office. The first being that the shareholder or the parent company has to have existed for at least 2 years. The rep office can't hire employees directly. It has to go through a labor dispatch agency. You are limited to only hiring 4 foreigners. I guess an advantage, the last 2 can be seen as advantages. There's no investment requirement. Basically, you're a cost center and you're just hoping that the shareholding company sends you funds that you can then spend that money. And then you have a registration process which is considerably less than a limited liability company. It's just 6 to 8 weeks. So that's the representative office. And during today's presentation, I'll compare the differences between a rep office and an LLC. Now, if any of you have done, which I'm sure many of you have, you've probably Googled or Binged what a wholly foreign-owned enterprise is, because that's actually the term that is utilized in China. And I just want to highlight on this one slide, and I laugh, because when I talk to a lot of clients that have done online research, they know the term woofie, but they actually don't really fully comprehend what it means. And just very simply, it is a limited liability company owned by a foreigner, a foreign investor, whether that's a company or an individual. So a woofie is a limited liability company. Now, a woofie structure are companies that are focused on providing a service either to consumers or to companies. They can't manufacture nor trade in goods. So examples of a woofie from my perspective would be consulting companies, training companies, restaurants, architecture firms, management service firms, recruitment firms, etc., etc., etc. Then you have the term that I'm sure you all would have found again on Google, which would be foreign invested commercial enterprise. Again, ultimately, it is a limited liability company owned by a foreign investor. FICEs, FICE structures, have import and export rights. So what this means is that it's any form of a trading company, whether it's wholesale, retail, e-commerce. Manufacturing companies also fall under a FICE because they import and they export and they do domestic purchases as well as domestic sales. There's a trading component within that. Activities of FICEs can also include franchising options, so keep that known. Franchising options can also be, for example, with restaurants under a WFOE. So keep that all in mind. And then obviously there are other types of LLCs which don't necessarily fall under a WFOE or a FICE, like purchasing centers, R&D centers, investment companies, regional headquarters, joint ventures, and the list goes on. There are many, many different types of foreign invested enterprises in China, and the structures that they're developing, if it's not a representative office, it's going to be an LLC. One type of structure I didn't highlight here are foreign invested partnerships. Foreign invested partnerships are generally associated with law firms and accounting firms. So this is why I didn't want to highlight that too much during today's presentation. So on this slide, we could actually end today's webinar because the simple conclusion between an LLC or a rep office is that you're going to use an LLC structure if you want to generate revenue and you want to trade locally. And ultimately, you are committed to the market. You're going to use a rep office structure if you're just looking for a short-term presence. You have no need to generate revenue and you're just there for marketing. Now, a rep office is something that foreign investors should not regard as just a simple way to minimize their exposure in case of failure in China. And the reason why I say that is because a rep office is not an optimum platform for you to succeed because you're not generating revenue. And everyone's ultimate goal in China is to generate revenue locally because you want to do business locally. You want to trade in either services or products locally. But let's go into greater detail as to why I would recommend an LLC. Reason 1, limited liability protection. And perhaps the main reason behind the popularity of LLCs in China is that they offer companies and business owners complete personal protection from liability, particularly if the shareholder is going to be a corporate entity or corporate structure. Essentially, should anything go wrong and the business gets into trouble, whether you're being sued or you're going bankrupt, you are not personally liable as the owner or the shareholder. Your liability is capped at the amount that you have invested in the business, and this is in relation to your registered capital, the capital that you're investing into the company that's also your working capital. And this basically protects you from liability from any bad debts, court injunctions, because it truly is regarded as a separate legal entity. The second reason are low startup costs. Now, this is also very attractive to first-time business owners, companies, small, medium-sized companies, not least due to the low cost of setting up. You will have application costs. Usually they shouldn't be going over 20,000 RMB. There is also no requirement for the registered capital. In some jurisdictions, you may call it the paid upfront share capital. There are no minimum requirements. Ultimately, as I highlighted in yesterday's webinar, you need to create your business plan. You need to create your budget to understand what your registered capital is going to be, and ultimately that's going to be your liability. So you want to balance it out between that being your liability and the working capital you actually need to invest into your Chinese structure. There are great tax breaks. Now, I laugh again because this is quite a controversial issue, and most people wouldn't associate China with being some sort of tax haven, and it's not. That's something that I want to emphasize during this slide, is that China is not a tax haven, but ultimately, nowadays, the whole global tax environment is tax transparent. So most governments, in fact, nearly all governments, are trying to dissuade you from choosing their jurisdiction for tax haven reasons. You want to, obviously choose a jurisdiction because you actually have to be there. You're going to be operational. And the key thing is the following with China. I mean, the reason why I say it has great tax breaks is the following. The registered capital that you're investing into the company will have no tax implication. It's basically a direct transfer from the shareholding company or individual to the Chinese bank account. LLCs in China are also taxed at a fixed profits tax rate of 25%. Now, again, this may sound like a relatively large amount compared to Hong Kong, where you can apply for tax exemption, or if you don't apply for tax exemption, taxes are at 16.5%, or Singapore, where you're taxed at 17%. Again, the issue for me, as I am advising clients on tax and tax optimization, is you need to all pay tax somewhere. And the global environment is that you need to be transparent with your taxes. You don't want to be caught evading taxes. But what you do want to do, and what your ultimate goal is to optimize your tax situation. In addition, there are preferential treatments provided in China depending on the sector, the industry, and the services that are being offered in the market. So for example, if you're a high-tech firm, and you can implement the criteria directed by the Chinese government within your structure in China, you can lower your profits tax rate from 25% down to 15%. So it's really important to understand what's applicable to you for your business and how to optimize your tax structure. All right? Don't think that you just can't pay taxes. You do. The question is, how do I optimize it? The next reason why I would choose an LLC is the range of permitted business activities. Now, with a representative office, as I mentioned earlier, you are limited to communicate, cooperate, and facilitate working relationships. That's all you can do. LLCs, on the other hand, allow you to undertake a broader and more extensive range of business activities. And when you create your business scope, you actually want to make it as broad as possible. Companies can actually apply for a license to trade in any of over 2,000 activities permitted by the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, from agriculture to finance. However, as I did highlight also in yesterday's webinar series, you do need to look at the negative list, which highlights which sectors and industries are prohibited or restricted in the Chinese market. And if they are restricted or prohibited, then you may need to go the joint venture route to get into the market. Another point just on this is when you're creating your business scope, a big tip that I can offer you is try to make it as broad as possible. Think really about your short and long-term objectives and try to encompass everything that you want to encompass over the next 5 to 10 years within that business scope so that you don't have to change it at a later date. Reason 5 is you can incorporate anywhere in China. LLCs are permitted to trade directly with the local market. You can take on office space, set up your business anywhere in the Chinese mainland. Now, obviously, for some of you, this may sound daunting because China is enormous. And, the question is, where should you locate? And the key is obviously trying to do a location study to find the optimal location for your business, looking at budget, looking at ports, looking at free trade zones, looking at where your suppliers' customers are located, etc. The sixth reason is the fact that you can also branch out and expand. Now, forming an LLC can be really one of the most effective ways to gain a foothold and build momentum in the market. So once your business is established, not only can you trade directly with the local market that in the city where you've established, but you can also open additional branch offices throughout the mainland to establish a greater presence across the region. And the key point here is that you're creating these branch offices with the same company name, same image. Whereas if you go the representative office route, in actual fact, you would need to set up an individual representative office in each city that you want to branch out to. It would be owned by the shareholder, and potentially you would not have the same name available to you if you go into other cities. The last reason, which I also find quite critical, is the fact that you can set up with multiple shareholders or just only one. The choice is yours. And if you are in this category of being able to establish and you're not within the negative list, you have the ability to do that on your own without a Chinese partner. I think this is really something that gives you great freedom in terms of going into the market. Having control of your business and not relying on a partner, or even if you do want to have multiple partners, investors, shareholders, you have the ability to do so. Now, we've hit reason 7. I do have a bonus section for you. I'm going to highlight today 6 additional reasons why you should choose an LLC. Now, you all probably thought that was going to be a short webinar, but it's not. I have 6 extra reasons for you. And what I want to do is actually highlight the difference with these 6 reasons between a LLC and a representative office, and really highlight for you the advantages of an LLC over a rep office. Now, one thing I highlighted in yesterday's webinar was marketability. And new market entrants to China, they really overlook this point. But such a perception can really be a significant barrier to business development and sales. An LLC is perceived in China as a more substantial market presence because it shows commitment. It shows and suggests to prospective clients and partners that a company is going to stay long-term in the market and develop there. A representative, because you're not able to generate revenue, doesn't show that level of commitment. Now, another point in regards to, besides the whole what it looks like to partners and clients, is what does it also look like to employees? How are you going to attract employees if you're only setting up a representative office, which today, from my perspective, they're becoming obsolete because it shows to employees that you're not committed to the market, and it gives them the idea, well, how long are you actually going to employ me for? How long are you going to actually need me? If I do the research for you in terms of your business, and after a year you find there's no market for your business, well, what am I going to do? And it makes it extremely difficult to find people. The second is the registered office address. And I know I'm highlighting it compared to what I said earlier about being free to locate anywhere in China. The registered office address is a requirement. You need to have a physical space when registering your company in China. Now, representative offices are limited to leasing spaces that are specifically for them. It's less the case in the Tier 1 cities, but if you are planning on establishing in the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, you need to find a landlord that has the ability to rent to a representative office. That's a really key function. In addition to that, a representative office needs to be in a commercial space. The question I get asked a lot is, oh, I have a representative office. I'm only planning on hiring one guy. Can't this guy's residential home be the registered office address? No, it can't. Residential addresses are absolutely not permitted, and they are checked because you need to show the real estate bureau certificate from your landlord when you are registering your company. And the real estate certificate highlights the type of building that you're actually going into, whether it's commercial, residential, retail, or industrial. Another aspect is that a limited liability company, so an LLC, can lease any office space. It should match your business scope. So, for example, if in your business scope you're highlighting that you're going to be doing retail, you will need to lease a retail space because you're indicating that that's what you want to do. If you are highlighting in your business scope that you're going to be doing some form of manufacturing, you need to be located in a factory space. So there has to be some common sense and logic within that. But ultimately, an LLC, depending on the business scope, can be located anywhere within China. And obviously, the key then is finding the right location, whether it's a free trade zone, whether it's outside of a free trade zone. For both the rep office and the LLC, virtual offices are non-existent. They're an illegal concept in China. You need to have a room with 4 walls. Total investment and registered capital is a huge difference between a rep office and an LLC. So there are 2 numbers which need to be provided to the Administration of Industry and Commerce. One is the total investment amount, and the second is the registered capital amount, which, by the way, you can only obtain these amounts if you do your budget. Okay, I'm re-emphasizing yesterday's big tip. You have to do your budget. The total investment reflects the total capital required to develop and run the company. And the registered capital is the capital amount used to start up the business until the company has a positive cash flow status. As I mentioned earlier, no minimum requirements. But it's really important that you create your budget and you create your cash flow. You need to understand what you need. Now, a representative office, on the other hand, in actual fact, most companies don't even create a budget. So if you don't want to go the route of creating a budget, probably the rep office is the solution for you, because there's no registered capital investment. There's no number which needs to be provided to the government bureau. Instead, what you're doing is you're telling the shareholder every month, I have XYZ amount of expenses. I need to get them paid. Either send me the money or please make the payment from overseas. Now, the problem with all of this is that based on your expenditure, you're going to pay taxes in China because the government foresees that with the amount of expenses you have, in some shape or form, your shareholding company is obtaining a revenue for the activities, the marketing activities that you're doing locally. So with a rep office, you have no registered capital. You're just asking for money to come over whenever you need it, and you got to pay taxes on that money. Whereas with an LLC, you're going to make a detailed calculation based on your budget of how much money you need to start up, and that money has no tax implication on it whatsoever. It's tax-free. It's coming into the LLC tax-free. So you're going to save money on taxes during your startup phase, which I think is probably the best reason I have given you today as to why an LLC is a better option for you. Now, shareholder criteria. One thing I didn't mention, so it's a subcategory of reason 7 that I offered earlier in terms of having multiple shareholders. There is a shareholder criteria which I highlighted earlier, and I want to re-emphasize here. It's the fact that for a representative office, the shareholder must have been in existence for 2 years, which prevents you from being able to open any type of holding structure or use any structure that might be in a more beneficial tax jurisdiction in order to optimize your whole supply chain. So keep that in mind, because with an LLC, it does not matter how long the shareholder has been established. And if you want to use one of your entities that is in a better tax jurisdiction, you have the ability to do that. Reason 5, human resources. And I think this is really a big component as well, because what you want to do when you're starting your business is really find the right people for your structure. Now, a representative office is limited to hiring only 4 foreign employees as representatives, which means that only 4 visas will be issued per rep office, and you are required to use a labor dispatch agent or service provider to handle the employment. And what this actually means is that your employees sign employment contracts with the labor dispatch agent and not you. Which again just highlights from an employee's perspective the lack of commitment to the market, because they're not even being employed directly. Whereas with an LLC, you are free. You have freedom to choose what you want to hire. You can hire as many foreigners as you like. You can hire as many mainland Chinese as you like. You do not have to use a labor dispatch agent. You can just outsource the payroll functions to a payroll provider. Now, obviously, one thing I do want to highlight here, whether it is for a rep office or whether it is for an LLC, is that the Public Security Bureau is tightening down on foreign visa issuances. And what I mean by that is they're clearly looking in detail why you want to hire this foreigner, what makes this foreigner special, that their job, their responsibilities, and their role cannot be done by a local. And you have to defend that. So definitely keep that in mind. And reason 6 of why you should use an LLC is the ongoing operational costs. And this really comes down to budget, and it comes down to also administrative costs, which everybody is keen on keeping low. No one wants to have this that's high. So obviously, a representative office, just being a liaison office, it has fewer ongoing compliance costs and procedures that have to be done on an annual basis compared to an LLC, particularly when it comes to accounting and tax compliance, although both have to be audited. But depending upon the length of operations and the size of the annual expenditure, an LLC can be significantly less expensive to operate due to the lower tax rates, the fact that the registered capital is completely tax-free, and that you do have a 5-year carry forward of losses as well for the LLC. So keep those in mind. Now here is my big tip of the day based on today's presentation, and I hope this is truly what I highlighted for you today. Keep the structure that you choose simple for you. Choose a structure that will ease your burden for the short and the long term. China is complex enough. And you will find that when you get into your actual business operations in terms of trading and dealing with suppliers and dealing with customers, the whole negotiation process, that's what should be keeping you awake at night. That's what should be keeping you busy, versus the actual entity that you've established and the corporate compliances that you have to incur for those entities. You want to make sure it's simple for you. Nobody wants the extra burden. So when you are going through the process of understanding what structure is best for you, and I hope that I've highlighted the advantages behind an LLC, which ultimately in the long term will be your entity choice, do it right from the beginning. It's going to really ease your life, and it will keep everything simple for you, and you will have less administrative issues that you'll have to deal with. So let's begin with today's Q&A. So we've got 4 questions that came in during the registration form process, and so far no questions from the audience today. But if you do have questions during this Q&A, just type them in. So one of the questions is, I have a rep office today, and it is not helping us expand in the ways we wanted. What options do we have? So this is actually going to lead to tomorrow's webinar, this question, but I'll just touch on it today for those that may not be attending tomorrow's webinar. If you have a rep office today and it's not giving you what you need in terms of your business expansion, in terms of what activities you actually want to perform now on the market, unfortunately, you can't convert. You can't just go to the Administration of Industry and Commerce and say, hey, this rep office, it's no use to me. I want to be an LLC. Doesn't work like that. And this is where complexity then comes in, is the fact that you need to establish a brand new LLC, and you then need to close down your representative office. Once your LLC is up and running, you transfer the employees, sign new employment contracts, you transfer assets to the new entity, and then basically you're up and running. Big dilemma is that, as I mentioned, every company has to have a registered office address. Only one company can be registered at one registered office address, which means that if you set up an LLC, you're going to have to figure out a solution because you'll need a different registered office address compared to your existing rep office. So that's a big dilemma. Like I said, choosing the right structure from day one and thinking from a short and long-term perspective will really guide you in the process so that you avoid this bureaucratic dilemma. Keep in mind also, an LLC takes approximately 6 months to establish if you're just a consulting company. It can be much longer if you're establishing a trading or manufacturing entity. So as a result of that, you might be missing out on bids or projects during that 6-month phase. Another question that's come in is, have you heard of incubation services? What is the difference, advantage, disadvantage of a rep office versus using an incubation service? Now, I'm assuming that the person that wrote this is a member of the China-Britain Business Council because they offer incubation services. And I think this is a fantastic solution to companies who are looking to do market research first on the ground in China. Basically, what incubation service means, and a lot of associations and chambers offer this service, is that the chamber or association will help you to hire an individual. So they'll be on a local contract. They will give you a workstation within their offices, so within the association's office locally in China, whether it's in Shanghai, Beijing, etc. I know that the CBBC has 14 locations in China where they can offer this service, so it's amazing. And they handle everything for you. So they supervise the staff, they handle payroll, and I think it's a fantastic way to do market research on the ground. I think, though, the minute that you start increasing headcount to 2 employees, that really should be your conversion to understanding that you need to establish something physical in your own company name in China, whether that's a rep office or LLC. My recommendation, probably 99% of the time, will be if you've used the incubation service for a year or 2 years, you're probably at a stage where you're ready to go directly into an LLC versus using the rep office at all. So it's either you go the incubation route or the rep office route. But again, a disadvantage of the incubation services, actually they're identical to the rep office. It doesn't show commitment. You're using another structure or entity to employ people, which might not give employees confidence, etc. The third question is, I'm not planning to generate revenue in China. I just want to have a presence in China in order to do marketing and to have local contact with suppliers and or customers. But I'm worried about my marketability and I'm worried about my commitment. What do I do? Now, in the case where you're not planning on generating revenue and you don't foresee yourself generating revenue even in the long term, you want to generate all of that overseas and you think it's going to work, I would still go the route of the LLC for a couple of reasons. One, it shows commitment to the market. So it's showing that you're marketable to customers, suppliers, partners, employees. The LLC will also provide you with tax advantages during your startup phase, in that you can use your registered capital as your working capital and you don't incur any additional cost or expense in terms of tax. So you can have a worry-free startup period. You can also use the LLC for just-in-case circumstances, which a lot of people don't always realize. Now, yes, at this very moment, you're not planning on generating any revenue in China. But what if? What if you meet a customer and he tells you, I'm not going to do business with you if you can't give me a VAT invoice, Fapiao. That's a big issue for a lot of companies that have gone the route of choosing a rep office. These what-if situations that they never calculated for, that they never expected. We have a lot of clients in the past that grew to a certain point where, they grew faster than they ever expected, and they needed to have a stronger local presence in order to be able to issue VAT invoices. So, even though you're not planning on generating revenue in China, you probably want to still consider an LLC for your long-term solution because of these what-if cases. One last question from the registration form is, I'm in the pre-investment stage, and I still need to do more research in the market. What would you recommend? Using a market research company or doing it ourselves on the ground? So if you are in this pre-investment advisory stage, which a lot of people are in, it's not that I'm against market research companies. I'm against the fact that you need to read a 100-page report, which I wouldn't want to do personally. That's just me. So my opinion on this is the following. I think there is nothing better than doing on-the-ground work yourself. Having a guy that you've hired or sending a guy from your home jurisdiction to China to do the on-the-ground work and research, where you can call this guy every day to get an update. In fact, you don't have to wait for a report to be issued. You can get feedback and responses so much faster. And all you're doing is paying for this guy's salary. And in this scenario, I would probably try to find a firm that provides incubation services. So that you don't have to go that extra mile and commit to the market with a rep office or an LLC. But market research companies, I really think just the only issue for me is the fact that I would have to read a report that I wouldn't want to read. And I just prefer having phone calls on a daily basis with someone who's on the ground and can give me feedback on a daily basis as to what's actually occurring. Now, another question that came in from Robin during the Q&A was, can a FICE be a joint venture? Now, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking that, Robin. A FICE and a WFOE are related to foreign invested enterprises. A joint venture is where you have a Chinese partner and a foreign partner. And the business scope is absolutely free, meaning that you have the freedom to create any type of business scope you like, whether it's a service-oriented one, like the ones under the WFOE, or whether it's an import-export one, like a FICE. Which ultimately means a JV could be a WFOE or FICE, but you just have a Chinese partner. That's probably the easiest way to explain it. I always think that in the end, the most key point is understanding when you're deciding on the structure, what's your business scope going to be? What activities do you want to perform, and what products and services do you want to deal with? And that will guide you in terms of what structure you're actually going to then create. We have another question that just came in from Oliver. It's quite a lengthy and detailed question. Oh, Oliver, this is a very detailed question and very long. Oliver, I'm going to reply to you directly immediately following this presentation, so please do stay on the line. That's all the questions that have come in today, and I hope that this presentation was helpful to you, gave you insight into why I would recommend an LLC setup versus a representative office. And even if you are today a representative office in China, come join me in tomorrow's webinar, which will be in relation to how to convert, change, go from a representative office to an LLC. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, if you'd like to have a free consultation in relation to your specific business, happy to do so. Just send me an email and I'll reach out to you. Last but not least, for those of you that are new to today's webinar, we have a free mailing that goes out on a weekly basis. It has generally publications on the mailing, one publication per mailing per week. It also gives you updates on events where we will be speaking at, and also our future webinar series, where we are planning to do a second round at the end of June with guest speakers. Please also follow us on social media. We have profiles on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We have our videos that are recorded on YouTube, uploaded on YouTube, and we also have Xing for those German speaking attendees today. I want to thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again at tomorrow's webinar. I wish you all the best, a great afternoon or a great morning wherever you're located in the world. Talk to you soon. Bye.